one of the interesting things, I think, is that to me, as a dean, as one of the faculties at UCT right now, this particular course and this series of lectures feels quite pertinent. And we were just discussing before, as we were waiting to start, that I'm sure that Professor de Jongh is going to start with introducing the South African crest. And the saying at the bottom, he's just told me, means diverse people unite. And I'm really hoping that this is going to be a good theme for UCT in 2017. So I hope you enjoy your course. I hope that you enjoy your lectures, and I'm sure that it'll be very interesting. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean. It was already dark. I was sitting, warming my hands in front of a small little fire that I'd made. And my thoughts were incredibly far away, and in another sense quite immediate. I was in what was then called Bushman land, in the northeastern corner of Namibia. It was then still called Southwest Africa. The reason why I was not only deep in thought, in fact in quite an emotional state. I had just heard that my father had passed away in Port Elizabeth, thousands of kilometers away. And I was thinking about that, of course, and also in terms of practicalities. How effectively and conveniently would I get from Tsumkwe, in the middle of Bushman land, Southwest Africa, to Port Elizabeth, to attend to everything that news implied. The news came to me via a runner. The locals called themselves, and the others called them, Bushmen. And incidentally, this is one of the themes that we'll be dwelling on quite a lot in this series of lectures this week. The whole issue of terminology. You've heard of San, and you know about Bushmen. Came by Bushman runner in a cleft stick, a little note from what was then called the Bushman Affairs Commissioner of Tsumkwe. While I was staring into these, and here's some alliteration, the fitful flickering flames of my camp fire, entered into my consciousness, because I was really, literally almost very far away, was a rhythmic sort of sound. And I would hear this and not hear it and carry on with my thoughts, but it became almost insistent, to the extent that not only did it draw my attention, it eventually demanded my presence. Because not maybe 1,000 yards or 1,500 yards away, the Kum, also called the Yuan Nazi of that area, were doing a trance dance, a Bushman, if you like, near the little place called Tsumkwe, even today. I went over there. I had known, I was aware of the fact that a young girl had been ill in the community for more than a week. And this trance dance was all about healing. So I joined them, and they'd become aware of my situation as well. And it was as if emotional windows opened up for us, for me onto their lives and their situation, for them onto my life and my sorrow. And from that day, that night, I literally participated. And it's a situation where the women sit in a circle and the men do a trance dance in a circle around them in the sandy, almost desert-like conditions near Tumkwe. And they do go into a trance. They had something on the fire, a piece of wood, gave off a very bright white sort of smoke. And as I literally joined them, because they gesticulated and indicated that we sort of in this sort of thing together, and they asked me to inhale some of the smoke of that. I still don't know what that wood was or the smoke, but I now know what you need to enhance trance and to go into an altered state of consciousness. But this window that opened up, and for the rest of my career, this is a long time ago, in the previous century. For the rest of my career since then, for many, many years, this experience with the Kum of that area stayed with me. And as we will know, and as you heard what the Dean said, these Bushmen, San, were, historically speaking, the earliest inhabitants of this subcontinent. Those very Bushmen served as trackers for our military people in that area during the border war. Remember Angola, Southwest Africa, that whole thing. And because of that uncomfortableness of their role as trackers and guides for the military, they were eventually, or some of those communities were resettled in South Africa at Smitsdrift, and some of them are still there. They've been given extra land, but that's where they are. But this stayed with me, these earliest people of this land of ours. Now you can see, you saw as the Dean indicated there, that's diverse people unite. It's very similar to this word, the Zulu word, Simunye. We are one. Now that's, and this comes incidentally, this rock art, sometimes still called Bushman paintings, is from what used to be the Transkei, the Eastern Cape, Maclear, the town of Maclear in the mountains. It's called the Linton Panel, one of the most famous, most exciting panels of rock art in the history of rock art research in this country. So our crest, coat of arms, motto, whatever, right, does seem to pay, if I may say already, lip service to the fact acknowledging these earlier people. This is in a language, I'm not sure, is there a technician or someone? Thank you. Maybe it's the positioning of this microphone that is that better? Maybe I should, I think, put it more strategically. How's that? No? No, it's not better, it's not better. Better? How's that? No. I wasn't raising my voice before in respect of these early ancestors of most South Africans, and I say that advisedly. So, yes, they are depicted in important in an important symbolic sort of way there, but we'll be investigating and discussing these matters. The rest of the week, tomorrow morning, the Karretjie people of the Great Karoo, you can see descendants of the Khan, Bushmen, San of the Great Karoo. Again, we're back to historically those earliest South Africans. Then the Hessequa, and we're going to talk terminology. It would generally in newspapers be spelled koi koi. That's the proper spelling and the pronunciation, and I'll stay with koi just for sake of intelligibility, is quen, quen. Means eminent people. Chauvinistically, it used to mean men of men. Also of the earliest inhabitants of this country. And many, many people, millions of people in this country are direct descendants of those Khoi. And then finally, in terms of case studies, incidentally, on the right is Maikis Verrooy. She's a Karretjie person, direct descendant on the Tom. And Reggie Busak is currently the acknowledged and recognized chief, Hoofman of the Hessequa Khoi people. Lives in Montague. And then the last case study, the base people from the Soutpansberg, and this is a previous chair of their management committee, Simeon Base. Very interesting story. 1688, French Huguenot Jean de Bois came from Calais in France, a wine farmer, ended up in the Cape, married a French woman. His son Jean married Macy van der Kaap, euphemistically meaning one of those locals, and his son ditto, and their son, not de Bois anymore, de Buys. Jean de Bois, Jan de Buys, Koenraad de Buys, famous, infamous renegade, warrior, cattle rustler, gun runner, etc. They now live in the Soutpansberg, that community. That's our third case study. And then we'll try and tie everything together on Friday morning, 9:15, presumably in the same venue, in terms of these forgotten first people. All of these people, in some way or another, to a lesser or greater extent, are descendant directly from those earliest people. Not only the San Bushmen, but also the Khuen, the Khoi people. Back to Chumkwe, the trance dance that night. Not very good images. Didn't want to spoil the evening with flash photography. And photography wasn't all that sophisticated at that stage anyway. You can see the circle, little fire, women sitting, clapping in the middle, the men dancing around with these seed pods as percussion sort of sound on the angles. The next morning, that's in daylight on the right, that's a person touching, conveying this healing, mythical healing powers to the woman in front of him by touch. And then below that, the next morning, this is where that dance took place. You can still see the circle where the men were shuffling around in a circle all night long. Now, the spoor of the first people, and I want to go to the extent of looking just at detail, a little statement on these Great Karoo, Tom, San people. Hunting, foraging, lifestyle, no more. But when we move around the Great Karoo today, their rock art, stone tools, rock gongs bear mute testimony to their erstwhile presence and rich heritage. This was their landscape and culturescape. These were the places and spaces where they gave expression to their beliefs and meaning to their lives. Places of ritual, symbolism, and power. Places that today we should revere and preserve for those still to come. This is a photograph of a rock gong. You can see all those marks on it, and it actually emits, nice English word, mellifluous sounds, beautiful musical tones. Musicologists have gone and studied. There are rock gongs all over South Africa, thanks to these earlier people. They made music and sent messages at great distances by means of these rocks. And they're all different shapes and sizes. It's just that they have to be dolerite, not dolomite. It's two different things, dolerite. They call them in the Karoo farmers an eysterklip, ironstone. And that's exactly what they sound. But they also have to be counterpoised, sort of balanced on another rock. But here's the evidence, just perhaps more dramatically, fact of a gone. Other evidence, very crude little shelter in the Karoo, remains of these hunting, gathering, bushmen, rock art all over the country. That's not the best that we have, but just to show you. Late Stone Age stone implements, board stones. A lot of people ask the question, what are they? What were they used for? There's a demonstration, I think, of how they did use them to get edible foods from under the ground to dig, a digging stick. And two different kinds of rock art, incidentally. One's painting, one's etching on rock. Two different disciplines, as it were, as far as rock art. Some people still refer to such art as Bushman paintings. Again, evidence, the spoor of these earliest historical people of South Africa. And not only San or Bushmen, but also the Khoi. We don't have good evidence of, although archaeologists have excavated and dated sites where these people lived, but their lifestyle was ephemeral. They were pastoralists. They moved on all the way. They left no real tangible evidence of where they were, except some stone structures. But the artists that came, the early European travelers, did this sort of thing with the Maitlis Huis on the right bottom there, as you see, and the typical dress of a leader of the Khoi, Chainokwa in that case, and then above left a typical sort of scene next to a river, the hut, the people, and then they have stock, not only cattle but also goats and those early fat-tailed type of sheep. Presence of these people, evidenced by early European travels. They saw them, they sketched them, they were there. And there weren't other people. And we'll look at the sequence just now. That's a bit technical, I suppose. You can see in the background, we're now into prehistory, just for proper perspective or to the contextual side. Shelters on the left top, at the bottom. This is Klaasies River along the east coast. A very, very important archaeological site. Blombos is more recent and much more dramatic in terms of early forms of art being found. Blombos Cave is near Stilbay, near Riversdale, Stilbay, that area on the coast. And then the sequence that you have in front of you, early Stone Age, millions of years ago. On the right there you have Australopithecus reconstructed by Raymond Dart, the very right image, very faded, very much in the background. But just as a reference, the earliest human-like, not humans, not Homo sapiens, human-like, date to millions of years ago. And I'm going very quickly through this because this is not what we're going to talk about. Middle Stone Age, 250,000 to 20,000 BP, incidentally, is before present. Archaeologists prefer not to work with the BC, AD kind of dates, but it tends to be confusion. And then late Stone Age. And now we're already talking San, Bushmen. This is where we found evidence of their stone tools, their rock art, their presence in this part of the country. And then eventually the Iron Age, and that's not found along the coast, mostly in the inland, the high-veld areas, where the early black communities had started migrating south. Now, just in terms of sequence, and I think this is important, that 20,000 and more years ago, the archaeologists have shown us, the geneticists have confirmed this, the linguists have done it, anthropologists have looked into that, were here. And it seems that they were a late Stone Age people who developed from those early prehistoric types, and they were here in South Africa. I should move. 2,000 years ago came the Khoi, in the history books, derogatory term, according to some people, but we'll talk around that term Hottentot in the lecture day after tomorrow. And they came 2,000 years ago. And eventually different migration routes, theories. We'll talk about how they ended up here in Cape Town, amongst other places, up the west coast and the east coast. And then only hundreds of years later, 1,700 at the earliest, came the black communities, having migrated south from the Great Lakes area, settled first in the Eastern Cape, roughly in the Eastern Cape area, and even later only on the Highveld. And this is where we enter the so-called Iron Age, because they were iron workers, iron smelters. They worked with metal, these people, had a significant and important presence here, but they were later arrivals. And then we talk European arrival, you know, that people, the Portuguese came around the coast already in 1400s. I mean, in 1480-something, I think Dyers was at Mossel Bay. And then came the Dutch, more concerted sort of journeys around the Cape, eventually settled here, you know all about that. And because of that, Jan van Riebeeck and co have been put in quite a bad light for occupying the land that the blacks used to occupy, but the blacks hadn't been anywhere near these areas by then. So there's also a bit of a debate around those sorts of issues. And then we can carry on. Let's just go through the sequence quickly. This was in 1880. George Stowe, very, very competent, important historian for those days, but a rather dramatic indication of the migrations. On your left, those arrows indicate the coming, according to him, of the Bushmen, which is incorrect because they were here. They didn't migrate from the north. But the red arrows on the left indicate fairly accurately, in terms of one theory, the coming of the Khoi, the early so-called Hottentots and so on. And then the solid arrows, later migrants, the Africans and counter-migrations. You can see the blue arrows going up north again when Mslekatsi and Shaka and all these people became active. So there was a lot of population movement, but not ever as dramatic as this map and diagram might suggest. Migration was not a wave after wave after wave of hundreds or thousands of people moving now suddenly within X number of years into South Africa. It was incremental, it was slow, it might just be a little clan hiving off from the bigger community, or as they were called then, the tribes, and over thousands of years they moved down and eventually settled. I think the key theme that I'm possibly illustrating here is that South Africans all came here and in different ways. If we are to dwell on the first come, first served theme, then we must give this back to the San and the Bushmen. All of us, South Africans, a lot, have to move off. If you stayed with that theme, if this was a principle in terms of land rights and land claims and land allocation, you must give New York City back to the Mohawk Indians now. They were there first. Not even Donald Trump can do anything about that. He was a recent immigrant from, I think, Germany. (1731), Kolb, or Colby, as he's called, also a historian. The point I'm trying to make in that previous map and this one, the fact is, sometimes fairly inaccurate in terms of geographical location, etc., but they saw, observed, recorded, drew what they saw. And these people, the San Bushmen and the Khoi people, were here. You can see this is, puts the Hessequa, that's one of our case studies, puts them right up on the right-hand side there. And then he just uses Koopman as one of the leaders of the early Khoi, used that as the nation, and Gunjaman as well. A few San Sebastian, 5th Base in Catherine, Mossel Bay. So here and there you see some recognizable geographical places. Point is, however inaccurate these people, and if you find the sort of common denominator of all these travelers, the fact remains they saw, met, interacted with people in South Africa at that stage. don't want to go into all of that detail. I just said just now, right at the top, of Simunye, which means we are one. And then, of course, our motto, as we've said a couple of times, unity in diversity. And here I say, we all came from somewhere in different ways to be here in South Africa, and we're not going to adopt this principle of first come, first served. If we had to do this, then we must give South Africa back not only to the San Bushmen, but perhaps to Australopithecus africanus, who was here 2 million years ago. And not quite, a little bit more feasible, incidentally. I work with DNA specialists, geneticists quite a lot on all my projects, and only a few months ago it's now become possible. They call it ancient DNA. It's now possible, if we take a sample, and saliva is good enough, we don't have to do the blood thing, the Dracula thing anymore, saliva. We can actually trace us back to prehistoric finds, Homo habilis, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal. Naledi? No, that was a different branch, not the human branch. So it's possible to go back into prehistory with DNA. But let's give the land back to Africanus, Australopithecus africanus. Okay, this I'm just reiterating. What is this? Is the sound still? No, now it's off. Better still. Sorry about this. There we just repeat what we've said. You can see the dates more accurately depicted there, and then finally the late Iron Age people who spread over the southern Highveld. What I said before, they were significant, they were important, these later immigrants from 1450 AD. It's, in terms of this sequence, quite late. And one such settlement was dramatic, Mapungubwe, that you might have heard about. Not as distinct in the background. These are gold beads, golden beads, and there's the gold rhinoceros, found at Mapungubwe, first excavated by archaeologists from the University of Pretoria. Wits has taken over and done very significant work. Important, dramatic, a kingdom second to none. I think it started falling apart, possibly interestingly because of climatic change. They sometimes call it a mini ice age. Came over southern Africa then, around the 1200s, towards 1300. And agriculture, which was what they did, was more difficult or not as lucrative as it used to be. And also Zimbabwe, the ruins, the kingdom of Zimbabwe became a formidable alternative or competing kingdom, as it were. So significant, Mapungubwe, the national orders, you see in the media every now and then somebody gets from the president this order for extinguished service or contribution to society, etc. And one of those is called the Order of Mapungubwe. So commemorating this very important kingdom, but in terms of our sequence again, quite late. Yes, sir?
The former slide for a minute, please. To make the former slide.
Yes.
For 1 minute. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that, incidentally. The map at the bottom indicates the location of Mapungubwe. You can see it's virtually at the confluence of the Limpopo and the Sashi River. It's far northern Limpopo province, nearly on the river. That's where it's situated. You can see there the three countries, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. That's the location. Okay? And then these black communities that came down, just for the record, later than some of the people that we'll be discussing, but here they are. Those brackets don't indicate direct kinship or relation, but just the categories by language and so on. And conventionally, you'll see the northern Nguni consisted of Zulu, Swazi, and Ndebele, and then the southern Nguni, mostly the Xhosa speakers. Now, they weren't Xhosa and they weren't Zulu as such, those groups of people. By convention, this is what people started referring. You talk about what used to be Zululand or Natal, they say that's where the Zulu people come from. But they were different groups of people, actually, quite distinct at one stage. Ditto, the sort of Eastern Cape area, the southern Nguni started referring to the Xhosa, Meanwhile, they were actually Bata and Fengu and other such people. And then, of course, the Sotho people up in the Highveld. And to the right, you have those two brackets, totally different in language and even earlier on in socio-cultural patterns. The Venda, the far northeastern corner, the smallest in terms of ethnic group, incidentally, in South Africa. Our Vice President, Cyril Ramaphosa, comes from that area. Ramaphosa is a Venda. And I see he's aspiring to presidentship. And if ethnicity plays a role in the process still to come towards the end of the year, then he has this one disadvantage. He represents the smallest number of people who call themselves, some of them call themselves still Venda or speak that language. And then the Tsonga people in the Lowveld mostly. And on the right you just have, and this is very traditional, just to depict the different sort of settlement patterns and so. Rituals far right at the top is the Domba dance for females amongst those same Venda people of Vice President Ramaphosa. Tembo in the middle, initiation for males, that's where Madiba, Nelson Mandela came from. Xhosa people, women on the left, busy with a ritual in traditional dress. Building a Swazi hut on the right, Ndebele, a very colorful mural. Now that you still find. You go to certain parts of South Africa, you might still find that sort of thing, but it's becoming less, it's dwindling, because people have now for generations, even centuries, moved to the cities in South Africa, and statistically, more than 50% of South Africans now live in urban contexts. Now, more specifically Europeans, you saw on the old map that we had earlier, all those red and blue arrows. There was a dotted line along the ocean, along the coast, and showed the 1400s when the Portuguese navigators started coming around. Dias, 1486, and da Gama, 1497. And eventually the Dutch came, 1500s to 1600s, and the infamous 6052 when a refreshment station was established here in Cape Town. The Huguenots, and I'm talking significant numbers of people coming. In terms of all of these, there were representatives of these people who came earlier as individuals or as small groups and so on. And even the British, some British had been to South Africa long before this fairly dramatic 1820 British settlers came and settled in Eastern Cape around Bathurst and Grahamstown and those areas. Now, conventionally, white South Africans are English-speaking or they're Afrikaans-speaking. Now, those who are referred to or might even call themselves Afrikaans-speaking, a few even call themselves Afrikaners, Africans, which is fairly accurate if you're born here. You're African. Came from Dutch, British, French, German, Jewish, Greek, and Portuguese forebears, and then the people who call themselves English, of course, came from mainly England or the British Isles. Now, descendants of early settlers here, and they still called, according to their ID books, coloureds or brown people, and we have a little longish discussion on that issue in one of our case studies. Maybe I can just go forward a bit in terms of this discussion. I gave a talk on that particular topic on the Hessequa Khoi people, and 5 or 6 of these Khoi leaders arrived for my talk, and they had porcupine calls and springbuck skins and staffs of office and all sorts of things. They looked quite dramatic, even a bit scary, because they had these weapons of mass destruction in their hands. Afterwards, they asked whether we could pose for a photograph, and 4 of them came, 2 on each side, and I was in the middle. I took a cell phone photo. I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Would you send me the photo?" And they did, and I'll show you it in the course of this week. They added a quite nice picture, all these weapons and skins around me, and they added a banner, and it said, "Colouredness must fall." So that's a key statement, and we'll be dwelling on that for the rest of the week. These people are now increasingly and progressively becoming aware of their ancestry and becoming proud of that they are direct descendants of some of the earliest inhabitants of South Africa. Remember in the previous dispensation, and I've got the legislation that I'll be referring to in that lecture, categorized people. You had to be white and you put in this place. Blacks you put over here. If this area is not white enough and you move people, make this more white or that one more black and stuff. But then they sat one day in a meeting and said, but these other people, they're not white and they're not black. What do we do with them? So they created a category, actually a racial category, artificial category, colored. And people still walk around with that in their IDs. There were some of these, our third case study, the base people, Dubois, descendants up in the Soutpansberg, they look at them and say, but they're not quite colored, you know. What do we do with them? What do we do with the Griqua people? What do you do with the Rehoboth people in Namibia, Southwest Africa? There's this colored. This is legislation with a copy of it. Got colored, we call them other colored. You see, these people are not being acknowledged as early South Africans, now increasingly proud South Africans, people who belong here and identify with this land. Then Indians, so-called Asians, 1860, thousands of indentured laborers came out to Durban, specifically to work in the cane fields. Some came before, some came later. A lot of them went back. But as Trevor Noah said the other day, if you had to drop an atomic bomb on India and just clear out India, then the biggest Indian country in the world would be Durban. So that is where they mostly settled, that is their area, historically and so on. And Chinese people were also recruited as laborers just after the Anglo-Boer War. Now, more correctly, according to some, the South African War, 1902, they came out by 1906. Yes, some 50,000 people were employed. And then, if that same atomic bomb thing had to be employed, then Port Elizabeth would have been the biggest Chinese country in the world. Now, it would be Johannesburg, Gauteng. That's where most of our Chinese South Africans now live. Okay, the Constitution. I'm not going to go through all the detail. Importantly, this is chapter 1. Chapter 2 is the Bill of Rights, incidentally, from our Constitution. This little book has it all. And importantly, point 5, just to recognize all our languages, the country in the world with most official languages recognized, 11 languages. But then it does say 2, A2. What about the Khoi, the Nama, and the San languages? And sign language, importantly, of course, but not official languages. And then eventually recognition, that's in the Bill of Rights. Status, role of traditional leadership according to customary law are recognized subject to the Constitution. Everyone has the right to use language and to participate in cultural life of their choice. But no one exercising these, of course, the Constitution overrules most. But again, it's in the Constitution, it's in legislation stemming from that Constitution, also in terms of right to space and place, right to land. But at this stage, if I can be so bold already to say that, we haven't developed our argument, as we will hopefully the rest of the week, mostly lip service. Mostly lip service. Nothing hits the ground. Nothing is really put into practice. At least we don't see that it has been. As I said, more than 50% of our people now live not in those touristy, traditional sort of contexts where you can go and photograph. That in cities, urban and on squalid townships, informal settlements, squatted areas. Massive problem. Statistically as well. But ironically, because of this massive problem statistically in terms of millions of people without jobs, millions of people living in squalor, these other people disappear in the bigger sort of picture of things. We have similar needs, similar demands and rights, but statistically they are insignificant and hence forgotten, hence invisible. Okay, little lesson. The dean referred to the motto. She didn't read it. She just said, according to what I told her, what it means. Look at those 3 clicks, okay? And then look at that. It's actually, Xhosa is a click language. It has 3 clicks, okay? It's indicated by C, Q, and X. C is behind the teeth. Q is in the palate. X is in the cheek. Like giddy up. Now you can work on that one. We are one, the diverse people. And as I said before, in our crest, in our national symbol, we have this Taam, C / Taam language, and we do have a Bushman Assam painting, which at least acknowledges the fact that there were such people. Now, we'll elaborate on all of this in lectures for the rest of the week, specifically and more detailed, the 3 case studies that I mentioned. First, the Karretjie people of the Karoo, direct descendants of these very same of the Karoo. I have a little story about this. Professor David Lewis Williams, rock art specialist of this country from Wits, had taken a day's leave to write up an article. It was about 1996. He was sitting at home on the 1st of April 1996 working. And Jeff Blundell, one of the other senior people in the department, phoned him. And he said, David, I've just had a call from the presidency. They want us to provide them with a suitable motto in one of the earliest languages, like a Bushman language, implying calm. And he was the expert. He still is the expert, long since retired, but he's the expert. And he said, okay, Jeff, I'll work on it. What shall we talk, like unity and diversity? What? Yes, something like that, that's fine. And he put the phone down, and he thought about this and thought, Jeff Blundell, they're all sitting drinking coffee in the common room there, and they're having me on. It's the 1st of April. They're having me on. So he went to his dictionary and his sources and stuff, and he worked out, emailed it to Jeff, and he said, fantastic, I have to have this in by 4 o'clock. And David said, are you serious? It's the 1st of April. He said, I didn't even notice. It's serious, the president is waiting for this. He says, hold on to that motto. He says, David, what have you done? He says, what I wrote there was, the man walks behind the bush and has a piddle. Serious, directly from him. This was nearly our motto. He says, hold it. And then he set to work again, and within an hour they had this. And incidentally, if I may say, Alan Barnard is a very prominent anthropologist at Edinburgh University, Scotland, and he's a linguistic anthropologist. He went into this Taam language and so on. And there's a slight mistake in this, and I won't point it out. Just a slight mistake. There might be ambivalence in that one word that should have been put slightly differently because of the click. I said just now, of course, I have 3 clicks. The Khoi languages and the Taam then have 3 to 5 variations on each of those clicks. If you get it wrong, you might be saying what he was saying. You know? So, when you switch to calm, please be careful. Thank you. We are on schedule. We don't have a chair, but I was led to understand we started at 9:15, and we have 45 or more minutes, and we've got 10 or more minutes for questions.
Question. I learned that the Xhosa didn't originally have all the clicks, and because they mixed with the Khoi, they then got the clicks.
Yes, I don't know whether everybody could hear that because of contact at Xhosa with the then indigenous, earlier arrivals, Bushmen, Kham, might not have been Kham, there were other San Bushmen in the area of contact, that they took over the click language. This has been confirmed, I think that is true. And they took over, with respect to the Xhosa people, they took a simplified version of all those clicks. They just had kept the three main clicks, as it were.
Rivers in the Transkei sometimes end with Kha and
Yes.
Koloch.
Yes.
That means mouth.
Correct. Like Karretjie. Yeah. Lungile.
I can add to that.
Yes.
Distinguished cultural expert explained to me that this is actually what happened. When a raiding party went out, they would bring back nice maidens for their chief. And the nice maidens obviously infected the mother tongue of the Xhosa people.
Yes.
And it sounds like
That happened. And when we deal tomorrow morning with the Karretjie people, descendants of the Kham in that area, at one stage, because the pioneer farmers had been moving into the Karoo incrementally, they just went further and further north, and the Kham people, the Bushmen of that area, saw this as their land, their game, their space, and these people were hunting their game. So the Bushmen retaliated as far as domesticated animals concerned, the cattle and particularly the sheep. And then the farmers of that area organized a commando system where they actually went to shoot Bushmen. And they shot as far as they could, mainly the males, and the females they took into the farms. And they became tame Bushmen, so-called Mak Bushmans. And there was also intermarriage there, and then the same. There's one here and over there. Yes, sir.
On one of the slides is shown Nama, the Nama. Are those the Sonkwa and the Sutswa or not?
Nama?
The Nama people.
No. No.
It's a different one.
No, Sonkwa is the early name for Bushmen.
Yeah.
And Nama, like Namakwa land.
Yeah.
The Nama people, Namakwa.
Yeah.
Namakwa.
Oh,
Or more correctly, Namakwa.
Yeah.
Namakwa. They are the Nama, and they divided into the Groot Nama and the Klein Nama. The big Nama in the north and the Klein Nama in the south. But that's in the west coast.
Yeah.
They are a community of Khoi people, like the Hiddingh-Currie, Hessequa, Korana, Chinakwa, you can go on. They're all different communities, but all Khoi with a similar language. Sorry, I missed out. There you are.
From your descendants in Chad, the European white group mainly came from Europe. Would there be an expectation, therefore, that descendants in South Africa today on the white group would have a greater amount of Neanderthal DNA? Within the one group.
There are a lot of people watching me here. The obvious answer is yes. Early geographical presence that matches Cro-Magnon or Neanderthal, yes. In that area of Germany, wherever that valley, which is Neanderthal Valley, Neander Valley, yes. And it's in its infancy, but more and more information is now coming to the fore. That seems to indicate that, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
In your chronology, I was just conscious that there was a very small group of slaves, but surely the slaves had much more impact.
They did.
Than that was indicated.
Yeah, if my depiction suggested small, then it shouldn't. No, indeed, yes.
Because it was a significant
Yeah.
influence of people.
In fact, on one of the slides, and I didn't want to, go into the technicalities too much for the sake of this sort of discussion, but yes, I actually list they came from Angola, Forget the East, Indonesia, etc. They came from Angola in numbers. They came from Mozambique in numbers. Madagascar in numbers. And we read all of that now in their DNA. And incidentally, all three of these projects that we'll be discussing in the next 3 days, I do dwell on the DNA a bit more, the genetics. It's there. And for each of these projects, for different reasons, they also did my DNA. Firstly, with the Karretjie people, and they were very allergic. Then we had to do blood to do a proper sample. We had to do a proper analysis. We had to do blood. Now it's not necessary. If you get enough saliva, you can do a very sophisticated DNA. But then they said no, they don't, because they were out there and they riding around in their donkey carts, and now suddenly they herded into this place where people wanted. So I said, and I'd been working with them for more than 10 years by then. I said, look, we're in this together. I'll go, you know. And I've got a phobia for needles, you know. And they took my blood. And if I may say so, on my mother's side, I'm absolutely South African, an African. The Y chromosome, which is the male line, that's mitochondrial. The female, the Y chromosome, my father's line. I tend to talk about that a little bit more. Direct matches with the Crusades of Alexander the Great. Yes, ma'am.
In Mapungubwe, there are lots of rock art sites which are not ever really talked about. Is anybody or has anybody?
It's been done. It's been done, amongst others by Lewis Williams's students, and obviously that predates Mapungubwe by far, you know. And the problem still is, sophisticated as analysis has become, number one, you can't take the paint off the rock, because then you know, and the only way you can really do accurate, absolute archaeological type dating is to analyze the paint itself, because they used, you know, plant and blood and whatever the case may be, and a mixture of that. So all of that is still relative dating. In other words, if you have a shelter where there's rock art, you would excavate it. By relative dating, you'd say this must be more.
Has anyone done that and has it been published?
Yes, yes. One can trace that. I'm not an archaeologist. My daughter is a rock art specialist, though. She's doing a PhD in the Cederberg on rock art. And this kind of question I could pose to her, and she would, as they do, these youngsters, they just produce all these articles. You know. They press buttons, you know, these articles.
Is one allowed to visit the Limson art paintings?
Yes, I was there last year, traveling in that area. But the problem is that some of that, in the early days before legislation was so muscular, had been taken. But the general site, general paintings, they even have guides. There are a lot of guest farms in that area now. What used to be the area of Transkei closest to the mountains, Maclear is the town. We'll take you around. The simple answer is yes. But some of that, you know, in the early days they thought, wow, look at this fantastic painting, Bushman, and they chop it out and take it somewhere. And in Wits, for example, at the Rock Art Center, they've got rooms full of rock art in situ, still the paintings on those rocks. The good news is, terrible as it sounds, that painting is better preserved than the ones that are exposed to human beings, putting lemon and orange on to bring out the color to photograph, to finger them, to touch them, rain, wind, sand, and that. So, and we actually have a piece of such artwork in storage, and we have a piece still exposed. It's like day and night. It's like day and night. Is that it, folks? Thank you. Thank you.